Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. The club's purpose is to engage the power of worldwide talent to accelerate the global evolution to Industry 4.0. We accomplish this by hosting and supporting respectful, thoughtful, and interdisciplinary open conversations and creating quality content on wide-ranging Industry 4.0 topics to expand the reach of our community. My name is Mike Ungar, and I'm the CEO of the Industry 4.0 Club. I've got over 40 years of leadership and experience, with most of that being in manufacturing at Michelin. Today, we're airing the second episode of our series broadcast entitled Lean Industry 4.0, Operational Excellence Meets Technology. Hosting the series with me is Tim Stuart. Tim is the president of Visual Decisions. Tim, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tim Stuart. As Mike said, I'm president at Visual Decisions. We've been in the business of using information from the shop floor to improve operations for 20 plus years now, working across a variety of different industries in manufacturing. And our focus is always on not just the technology itself, but also the people and the process side of things and how to transform the process afterwards so that you can make the best use of the technology that you're putting in place. So that's our approach, and happy to talk today about how to upskill employees to really take advantage of that.
Thanks, Tim. So, as Tim alluded to, our broadcast today is entitled Preparing Your Teams for Success in the Digital Era. Our guest today is Adrienne Temple. Welcome, Adrienne. Glad you could join us.
Thank you.
So just a little bit about Adrienne. She's the Vice President of Training Programs at the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or as we abbreviate, SCMEP. She provides assistance that leads to top and bottom line growth for manufacturers by delivering high-value programs and training offerings which are relevant and easily accessible. The SCMEP helps manufacturing companies throughout South Carolina by solving business and supply chain process problems. Through SCMEP, Adrienne helps companies determine and follow the best path for advancing their businesses to more competitive and profitable levels. She's been with the MEP for 10 years now. Prior to joining the South Carolina MEP, Adrienne spent nearly 13 years with Shaw Industries in a variety of technical leadership roles. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Textile Chemistry from North Carolina State University, and we're really glad that you could do this today. Thanks for doing that. So, Tim, we're getting ready to talk about, as you mentioned, upskilling or helping preparing our workforce for the digital era. Can you kind of give us some more background on the topic and why it's relevant for our listeners?
Sure. So with all the new software and hardware that are available as part of an Industry 4.0 initiative, you also need to find a way to enhance the capabilities of your people. The software and hardware that you put in place as part of these initiatives doesn't create the benefits for your company alone. You still have to look at the behaviors of your people and how to help them take advantage of the new technology that you're putting in place. I use the analogy all the time of a Fitbit, where I've been wearing a Fitbit for over a decade now, and I really haven't gotten the benefits of it. I haven't lost the weight, and it's because I haven't changed my behaviors. I haven't really utilized the information that's available from there. And it's the same thing with these systems on the shop floor. If you don't really take advantage of those capabilities by having your people know how to get information from there, how to use that for problem solving, how to use that for root cause analysis and so forth, you're not going to get the benefits that you're expecting. And so in addition to training on the smart solutions themselves, being able to help your people with data literacy, problem solving skills, etc., is going to really help you get the maximum advantage that you can from implementing these Industry 4.0 solutions. The other really important thing that I see is that you can help to create a common language across your organization for how to address these problems within your organization and how to utilize the data in a common way across the different departments and different people in the organization.
Thank you for that. So let's just jump right in and get started here. So Adrienne, I know you spent 10 years with the South Carolina MEP, and I think you shared with us that you started as a regional VP helping companies directly, and now you've taken on this role for all the MEP relative to training. How have you seen the way companies approach training over these past years? How have you seen that evolve?
There's been a lot of changes. Let's focus on just say internal training and skill transfer and trying to get everybody up to speed or cross train, for instance. There's been a real shift. Traditionally it's been use your SOPs and your standard operating procedures and your OJT on the job training. We like our acronyms on the job training and kind of use that as our model for training, cross training, whatever it may be. And we've seen a transition where all of a sudden there was a lot of adoption of the training within industry model where it's my SOP doesn't get down at the task level. It doesn't explain why, right? We're not providing enough information or context around what we're doing. So we're having poor outcomes on our training program. So we saw an uptake on the TWI program for quite some time. And then we've seen more recently, more folks looking at this opportunity to put things out as, digital training opportunities where they use some type of LMS just to have it more accessible and integrate it into other technology they may be using on the shop floor on an ongoing basis. So there's more of an embracing of this new, can I get it digitally? Can I put it in a format people can use real time on the floor? We're seeing a transition more to digital assets as a way to keep that learning in front of their employees.
Yeah, you mentioned LMS. What is an LMS?
Learning management system.
Good, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So things have changed a lot in just a short time. What about the MEP? What training offerings have you added relative to Industry 4.0? Industry 4.0 has only been around for a decade now. So what's the MEP doing today to help companies with respect to training in that area?
It's really started with some of just the educational context of, the different technologies, looking at AI, machine learning, as well as cybersecurity portions of it, understanding your digital twins. So we've started to build some education around the concepts and, to Tim's point, that vocabulary. What does this really mean, and where does it fit, and how do people use it? But then also it's incumbent upon us to nurture that journey of actually leveraging that technology. And sometimes that starts with, how do I understand how it affects my use case versus in a case study, how that might work. And so we're actually starting to put together, I dare say, training events. I'll say immersive experiences where people can come engage with technology. So a cobot, for instance. So you can actually engage with the equipment, program it yourself, and start asking some of those questions about, does this fit for my use case? Is this relevant? And sort of explore the options as well. So it's a different take on training, but a way to experience technology and start getting your questions answered.
Tim, have you seen similar things with your clients?
I think so. There's traditionally been a focus within manufacturing of, as Adrienne was saying, just getting them up to speed on what is the task that they have to do, what is the specific job that they have to run, if they're on the line, what are the operating procedures, what are those step-by-step instructions that they have to have, and there's either offline training or online training for that. You might have somebody stand over their shoulder for a few days to help them, but there hasn't been a tremendous focus in traditional manufacturing on growing the employee beyond that, I don't think. And coming from a lean manufacturing background, Taiichi Ono said that one of the goals of lean manufacturing is to create thinking employees. That you want the employee to be able to problem solve, to be able to take ownership of the situation and help to drive those continuous improvements themselves. And I think that in some of those companies, they've done a good job of really helping to drive some of that learning and knowledge down to, throughout the organization. But I think there's still a long way to go in a lot of companies to really achieve that. I look at technology as one way to kind of spur that, but again, kind of mixed in terms of the approach of different organizations.
Adrienne, you said something that was really helpful, I think, for our audience when you talked about you're trying to create experiential sort of learning where, hey, come put your hands on it, come try it out. I think the concept of creating labs, I'm going to use the word a lab, where folks, where shop floor employees or people on the front line, supervisors, they can come in and they can actually get their hands on it and understand that the technology is not too scary, that it really can be helpful. That makes a lot of sense. So is the MEP actually trying to create a lab of sorts?
Not at this point. I think for us, we have a large population of manufacturers that are not necessarily adopting Industry 4.0 technology. And I think a lot of it is not really understanding if it's a good fit for them. And I use automation and cobots as an example of that. And we're trying to break down those barriers. It's accessible technology. To your point, the ask of the skills for someone to program a cobot it's gotten to where the technology is far more approachable and accessible. So it might be drag and drop programming, not writing code, right? So we're trying to get people beyond that barrier of this is not for me. This is meant for really large, mature organizations that have a lot of resources to do this. We're just trying to break down barriers at this point and make the technology more accessible and I guess combat some of the myths around who it's really for and where it fits.
We have, I know in the ecosystem of South Carolina, we have a few really large companies and an awful lot of small and mid-size. So for the small and mid-size, they're the ones that seem to be the ones you want to break down the barrier. But you've got large companies that you also support that already are moving in this area. How do you actually try to marry what the large companies are doing in terms of their training and offering with the small folks, or how do you deal with the ecosystem where it's so different from one to the other?
I think where we can benchmark off what large organizations are doing, right? They tend to lead in the space and they're developing new programs on a regular basis because they're ahead of the curve. And we want to benchmark where we can. But there's so much that still needs to be done in the small to medium-sized space that doesn't necessarily make that jump to some of the advanced technologies. To Tim's point, lean methodologies, problem solving, we're still at some of the really basic components of an operational excellence strategy, right? And we're still focusing on some of that, helping people to understand how to get to a point that they're ready to adopt technology. But, certainly you said two total different parts of the spectrum and just trying to make sure that we adjust and right size our solutions in terms of training and skill development to where they are in their journey.
That makes a lot of sense. When you think about the development needs of companies, I know we talked about Industry 4.0 and some of the new needs that people have to learn, new technologies and new skills. What's remained constant? I think you hit on it some with lean, but what are some of the other things that have remained constant through this evolution to Industry 4.0?
Definitely your lean methodologies will probably stand the test of time, right? Problem solving, critical thinking skills, and let's not overlook that need for continued communication and leadership skills because there's so much changing in the landscape beyond the addition of technology. You've got a lot happening in the workforce and, emerging workforce versus your tenured folks. And it's just a lot of dynamics. So you still need to have strong communication skills, especially as we lend ourselves more to technology. We still need to be able to work together as people and still communicate effectively. But problem solving is going to be a big part of it. And Tim mentioned something I think is interesting is, to your point, it's I think technology is going to democratize the access to information, to your point, but nobody is necessarily spending as much time on, what do I do with it? Right. Critical thinking skills is not all word problems come with all of the components you need to solve that equation. So how do we teach you how to ferret out what you need and make decisions from that? And I think that's going to be an ongoing component of a success strategy when you look at where we're headed with technology.
And not specifically around upskilling, but businesses also have to think, if they want their people to be proactive in utilizing this information and looking at the data and using it to improve the process, at that local level, they also have to think through how they're going to empower their people to make those decisions. That if you want your people to be analytical, to use the data to improve the process and so forth, you have to give them to do so and the support that is required in order to do that, and not fight them because they didn't spend their entire time just maximizing production or whatever other goal.
Yeah, that's true. So when I think about that particular item, what maybe and Adrienne, both Tim, what would you say is how much time should a company allocate for this ongoing development of its employees? Have you ever had that question asked? Anybody ever asked you that question? For example, should I dedicate 2 hours every month for an employee to do some upskilling and training? Do you have any guidelines on that, Tim or Adrienne? Your thoughts?
I don't have any specific guidelines around that. And what I've seen typically be most successful in terms of developing those skills and so forth is to start involving people in some of these improvement projects. And so, for instance, I worked with a company that every Tuesday they would shut the line down for at least an hour and work with the employees on one line at a time to look at the data that had come from the previous week and work with them to understand what that data was telling them, and then brainstorm different ideas on how to improve the process. And that wasn't formal training, but by involving the people in that process and by actually having them participate in those improvement efforts, that was providing them that ongoing training, that ongoing upskilling over time, in the process of also improving the process itself. And so I think there are ways that when we're talking about the critical thinking skills, problem solving, root cause analysis, and so forth, that you can do that and still add value to the process at the same time. I think that the offline learning and more of a formal setting is also going to help with some of those things, but I don't really have a guideline for what percentage of time that might be useful.
Yeah.
Adrienne, okay.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. I mean, I don't know that there's a formula that makes the most sense. And in manufacturing, I know that, it's time is at a premium, and to do any type of classroom training is always a bit constraining because they're also doing safety topics. They're doing other things they're trying to roll down. I mean, I believe where you can, to Tim's point, I think if you can start integrating just the real-time conversation, go into Gemba, go to where the work happens, have that line of questioning, talk through some things. So what did you do there? Why did you do that? What was you're trying to create lifelong learners, right? And so that doesn't always happen in a classroom or just online. It has to be ways to reinforce learning, and that comes from experience and application. So I don't know if there's a secret sauce for the perfect amount of time you can allocate, because everybody's business model is different, the way their shifts operate, when they can give access to resources.
Sure.
I think the biggest thing is do try and make an effort to create opportunities for learning, even if it's short burst learning. Always make that time investment for some type of learning, even if it's real time on the shop floor.
That's really great.
And it comes, it comes back to leadership, like you talked about earlier, Adrienne, where if the leadership makes it part of what they do to take those opportunities to, when they do their Gemba walks, not just find out what's going on the shop floor, but take time to teach people how to go through that analytical thinking as they walk through those different situations. Those things will pay back over time. But we also need to think through how to teach the leaders to have that mindset and to do those activities and to teach those lessons as they go.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good reflections on. It's an interesting challenge. I know you're exactly right, Adrienne. Time's at a premium, And as a manufacturer, you've got to fulfill your customers' needs, and yet you also have to develop your employees, obviously, because it could become at some point that could the skills that they have could become a bottleneck to your actually being able to advance and continue to serve your clients. So it's a dilemma, because it's typically a longer term goal, that development piece. When we went through COVID, I know that changed a lot of how we all worked, and certainly how we trained. What happened with the training the MEP did, and how has it evolved really over the last 5 years?
2020, right before the pandemic really took hold that spring, we had already started the process of going to offering some type of online training. And over the past 4 years, we've been adding to it and refining it just to create more opportunity, and also be able to reach other parts of the community that otherwise may not have access to that type of training, or might not be in the financial position to send someone out for training and pay for transportation and overnight costs. So we transitioned to online, and it can be asynchronous. We also have some virtual instructor led as well. But I think that just that first shift has also changed us to looking at initiating digital credentials versus printed certificates, and digital materials instead of printed books. And so we're continuing to push to leverage technology to optimize what we do, and enhance the learning experience and the way that our folks engage with us. So that's been one of the major changes. But the one thing I'll say is because I think sometimes we tend to look at the world in terms of absolutes. I'm not saying it's all or it's one. It's not all online or in classroom. It can be a mix of both. So I don't rule out the fact that omni-channel delivery may be another way to enhance the learning experience, where you get some context and some pre-work prior to coming in person, so you really get maximum value out of the in-person interaction as well.
Yeah, it sounds like that sounds really good, especially the idea that we just talked a minute ago about schedules and how challenging it is, and everybody's on a different schedule. Having asynchronous training available can really support the diversity that we have in terms of the manufacturers in South Carolina. That's really great. Yeah. So when I was working back in the 90s, we went through what I'll call the third industrial revolution, for lack of a better way to describe it. But we put computers on the shop floor, and we had to take time and make sure everybody had good, strong basic skills. So could they read, and could they write, and could they basically do the basics of a computer? And we had some folks that couldn't make that journey, but we really worked hard through our learning centers to give everybody that opportunity to advance. Is there anything like that now that you're seeing that we need to pay attention to as we move into this industry 4.0? Adrienne?
You're gonna have a mix in your workforce in terms of comfort with technology, or using technology to do their jobs, right? So to your point, it's just computer literacy and things like that. For us in particular, we don't necessarily address that piece of it, but I think more manufacturers are recognizing that their folks are perhaps less comfortable with some parts of that, and maybe trying to help them overcome some of those challenges. But also, there's a lot of things that are accessible by phone, and phone doesn't seem to be, mobile phones now don't seem to be as intimidating as they used to be, but you still got a mix of generations. I think that's always going to be a challenge to some degree, and just helping them to overcome some of those fears of engaging with technology, whether it's computer-based learning, whether it's things that are on the floor as well. I mean, there's still an interest in trying to develop our folks to be more willing to embrace new concepts and new delivery methods.
So it sounds like go ahead, Tim.
It's interesting in talking with lean manufacturing people over the years, where in the early 2000s, there was a strong avoidance of technology as part of lean, where everything was paper-based, whiteboards, etc. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the old school lean practitioners still have some of that mindset and so forth. But I really think that the world going to smartphones and everything else has changed. Even the older workers in the organization all carry around a smartphone and so forth, or nearly all. And I do think that as long as the information is presented correctly and there's some thought given to the user interface and keeping things relatively straightforward, that I don't think there's the same fear of technology amongst the workforce that there used to be. And I don't think it's as big of a hurdle as it once was. So I think, as we move forward, it becomes less and less all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you have the technology piece, but then you also have, with the amount of data that's available, I think helping people become comfortable in accessing that data and understanding that there's another element there, that because we have the technology and now we have the data that we can get to more easily, and in fact we're expected to use it in order to help us make decisions. Now there has to be some training around that, I think, as well. Is there anything that the MVP offers in that area, Adrienne, or anything you've seen with different companies along those lines?
As far as the way the information is presented to them?
Yeah, in other words, the fact that there's technology, but then there's also being much more data savvy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have a lot more people now that, to your point, Tim just mentioned about the boards out on the shop floor. I mean, people have turned to digital monitors and showing things in graphical format and making the information more approachable and easy to understand. So I do think there's been a transition to more digital display boards showing the data. Some folks have embraced the development of applications, so different apps for things. And again, you have opportunity there to customize how the data is presented, right? And how someone interfaces with that information. So, we haven't necessarily done any specific training other than, for instance, I'll use Power BI as an example, right? That's a convergence of data to show all of your different sources and put it in a meaningful format. And we're doing more around that space, because I think that's where rubber meets road with a lot of, let's say, your operators, is the data coming at me. How is it being presented to me, and how can I digest that and know what to do with it? We're probably focused more on that side of it. But I do see a lot of manufacturers, like I said, going to digital dashboards with lots of visual representations. And then there have been some folks that have leveraged apps as well, which most people are quite comfortable with in app, because usually it has limited things that you can do. The presentation of it's very seamless. So people are advancing in that direction as well to make it, less intimidating, more accessible, very streamlined.
It's funny. Over 20 years ago, when I named my company Visual Decisions, I did so because it's so much more easy and more intuitive to look at a graph and see that there's a dip in the data, as opposed to looking at a big chart of numbers and trying to figure out what's going on from the big table of numbers staring you in the face. You look at a graph, you can pretty much instantly see. And some graphs are more complicated than others, but if you have a simple line graph, just about anybody can look at a line graph and see, is it going up, is it going down, is it going like this, or is it pretty steady, and so forth. And it's pretty straightforward to walk somebody through, this is how you use that information.
Right.
And so I think that making it as visual as possible certainly helps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As we're having this conversation, I'm hoping that some listening to it now will maybe a leader in their organization listening to this, and they realize that they should probably think about their own workforce, and they're going to ask the question, what do I need to do? So what advice would you give them about how to get, if they haven't spent much time thinking about or addressing this topic of upskilling their workforce? Adrienne, what do you think?
Obviously, but my first recommendation is reaching out to a SCMEP regional VP, simply because it facilitates the conversation of, let's look at where you currently are and let's talk about where you're headed, and let's find the gaps, right? And whether that's through your training or services that we can do, or also there's lots of ecosystem partners that support manufacturers that have programming that's very specific to training and workforce development. It kind of connects all the dots and helps people put together a meaningful path forward that's going to help them reach those outcomes. So that would really be my recommendation. But really, step one is recognizing you have an opportunity. And sometimes that's a little hard to get to. So if you've reached that point, you need to do something different or you need to make change. That's the hardest first step. But, from there, I would say, talking to your regional VP would be a good next step just to assess where you want to go from here.
Tim, how would you answer that question? So if companies are thinking of getting started on upskilling, but they're not sure what to do or where to go, what are your thoughts?
My first thought, as you were asking about the leaders and the approach that they should take, is to lead by example, to make sure that they understand how to interpret the data, how to utilize that data, and so forth, how to ask the right questions of their people, as we talked about earlier, to kind of germinate those thoughts and ideas and learning as they go through the process. But there are a lot of resources that are available. Whatever state you're in, every state has an MEP program that you can reach out to. There are community colleges that offer strong programs in this area to help the different people. There's all kinds of online learning available. There's additional outside resources as well. And so there's a number of ways that you can get started down this path. But the first thing to do as a leader is to make sure that you're comfortable with the information and you understand actually how to utilize that to start to improve the process.
I think it's great, going back to both of you mentioned this idea of finding some resources to help you. You mentioned the regional VPs, but going back to the MEP model, I think the idea is having somebody to talk to help you figure out why do you want to do it, first of all, and then figuring out, well, if there's a particular problem you want to solve or a particular you want to be proactive and be prepared for a future challenge, that's the first step. But what is that? Then you can come up with a plan, I think, to prepare your workforce to meet that challenge. And I think that's always the opportunity. I know I hate to say this, and I'm sure I'm like many people, I have been involved in training that didn't have a lot of impact sometimes. And sometimes it's because we weren't sure why we were doing it or what we were trying to accomplish at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other part of that is quite often we did it, but then we didn't use it. So we had a particular goal in mind, but we didn't use it. So I think there are some elements there that if someone's interested in getting started on this journey, you've got to clarify a few things before you get started. Otherwise, it's probably not good use of your time and money.
Yep. Absolutely.
Have you seen that? Have you seen folks fall in that trap a little bit as well, Adrienne, in your tenure?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it does happen. And sometimes it's not really, like you said, begin with the end in mind. What is it you're trying to achieve? And make sure you build a path to that. At the same time, though, application is extremely important. I mean, what you learn conceptually, what you're able to apply is going to really crystallize that learning and help you to kind of commit it to memory and become a little bit more experienced with it. So there are always misses like that in training. We have our best intentions. We do something. We don't set up the infrastructure to nurture it. So to Tim's point, leadership maybe is a challenge. So we're not reinforcing, or it may be, same thing with like Six Sigma methodology. Well, I don't have a resident black belt. I don't actually have a Six Sigma program. One person alone can't probably carry it. So it's all about mobilizing around it. So where you can look at it big picture and figure out what I'm going to need to be able to support what I'm investing in, that's always a best practice, but we all have misses. The biggest thing is to learn from them.
So it's crystal ball time. Okay. So just a chance to ask the question. So if we think about the last 10 years, we've seen a lot more online training and asynchronous training, a combination of both a virtual facilitator with online training, or, as you mentioned, some pre-work, asynchronous pre-work online before coming into a classroom. Then we also have things like augmented reality that can also help folks learn. If we look to the future, what are some of the trends that you guys both are seeing, looking at in the next few years? What will companies be doing more of, do you think?
From my perspective, I don't think people at a broader scale are using the virtual reality or augmented reality. And I think that may be leveraged a little bit more from a skill transfer and exposure standpoint. But then also I think, and this technology is already out there, but I think with the AI trend that's happening right now, AI-based learning, I think will be another thing that more people, as it becomes more accessible, as AI gets smarter, sort of AI-based learning. So you get situational interactions from a communication or leadership standpoint. And that could lend itself to more of the critical thinking skills and given some situations in a production environment and making decisions. I think that might be a technology that would be worthwhile because it customizes to the learner and it's scalable. It probably nurtures a little bit more perpetual learning than just a one-off scripted situation.
One of the things I've seen that's been pretty successful in industry is the video analytics, and you have to worry about big other concerns and things like that. But you can put a camera over the top of a workstation and actually determine whether people are following standard work, and you can provide immediate feedback if they start to deviate from standard work. And what that allows you to do is not only give them the one-time training up front, but also give them continued feedback on how they're doing the job, and offer pointers for when they're doing something incorrectly, how to correct that issue. And so it greatly facilitates cross training. It facilitates new workers getting up to speed faster and really retaining those learnings as they go forward.
Yeah, that's neat. So that's a specific application. Yeah, there's a lot ahead. It's going to be interesting, and more so than ever, given the fact that the pace of change is greater and greater. Folks are going to have to be able to learn and adapt, right? That's the other part. I think that's really key. If there's a message to anybody working really in any job, but in manufacturing, it's being adaptable to new things and new technology and being able to learn new things. So it's really key. So we're getting ready to wrap up our discussion, and I think it's been great to hear that your perspectives on getting your workforce ready for the future. Do you have any final thoughts? Maybe we start with Tim and then Adrienne on you'd like to share with our audience today. Tim?
For getting started, as a leader in the organization, I think that, as I said earlier, first focus on yourself and how you utilize the information coming from the shop floor and how you can start to improve things, and how you can work with your people as you interact with them to both help them learn some of these data literacy techniques and so forth, as well as how you can encourage that. And then you can start to look at what are the different training things that you can put in place, what are the different outside resources that you can utilize, and how you want to put that overall program in place to create a learning organization within your company to continue to build those skills across your workforce over time.
Thanks, Tim. Adrienne?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tim. I mean, I would say, there's no one size fits all approach to answering the training needs. I'll say it's important to understand where you are and where you're headed, and then identifying the gaps that might impede your success to achieving that outcome. But the bottom line really is, to me, don't let fear of the unknown sort of breed inaction, because that would be the worst thing, right? I mean, we just said, stay adaptable, be agile. The pace of change is really ramping up in this industry specifically. So just don't let that fear keep you from doing anything, because one step forward is still progress. I mean, never forget that. It really is. And so we need to look at it in that way. Let's play small ball if we have to. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
thank you very much. Well, thanks to both of you. So just as we begin to wrap up here, I want to thank Tim and Adrienne for joining us for this insightful discussion. And also want to thank everybody in our audience that's been listening. Really appreciate your joining us for this period of time. So if you're interested in these sorts of conversations during the series, we would like to invite you to join us. And so you'll notice on our LinkedIn page and also on our website, there's a small questionnaire. If you'd like to join one of these broadcasts, please fill out the questionnaire, let us know who you are, and we'd be glad to invite you to join us to talk about these important topics around Lean Industry 4.0. The Industry 4.0 Club, we host conversations like these on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, alternating topics around the themes of women in manufacturing, the future of manufacturing, fireside chat with an interesting industry leader, someone like Adrienne, and of course, our people, process, and culture broadcast as well. And again, please join our LinkedIn page and visit our website at www.industry4.0club.com. So I'd like to, again, thank you guys for joining us, and I wish everybody a great day. Thanks, Adrienne. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.